after which she accepted a position in the General Conference Youth Department as an editorial assistant, where she managed the One Year in Mission initiative. Her primary ministry is working with teen girls and developing resources that address the real issues they face. She also dedicates time to the continuing emphasis in women's ministries on abuse prevention and education. One of Erica's greatest desires is to empower young women to have the tools to make wise choices in their relationships, recognizing that the choices they will make now will impact them for their entire lives. I would encourage each of you, as you are listening to Erica's presentation, if you have any questions, write them in the chat room. And I will make sure that we pass this on to her so that she can clarify a few things for us and enlighten us even more. So Erica, I'm turning this over to you.
Thank you and good morning. It's a pleasure to be here and a privilege to share some things that I've learned over the last few years working with adolescent girls. It has been such a privilege to spend time with them, to work alongside them, to work with other mentors. And so I hope you hang with me today. There's going to be probably a couple topics that we might think are a little bit controversial, but hang with me, write your questions in the chat. And I hope that you can take away um, some things that you can take back to your local churches, your communities, as we work to empower the young women around us. So I'm going to start sharing my screen here. Love me or lose me. It may seem oversimplified, but a lot of what I'm going to talk to you about today is understanding how to love our young people better. And unfortunately, we don't always know how to do that. And I want to start this morning by just sharing a couple of stories with you um, before I head to the bridge. I was at a large convention, women's convention several years ago, and I was there to do a teen seminar. And the woman in charge at the time of this convention um, saw me and walked over and said, Erica, I know you're heading into your seminar, and I just wanted to let you know that one of the young ladies that was coming to your seminar, I stopped her before she went into your room. She was wearing jeans, and not only was she wearing jeans, they were ripped. She was in tennis shoes. And so I told her, you go right back upstairs and change because you are here to worship the creator of the universe. I was silent for a moment and I said, that really breaks my heart because the only thing that that young woman will walk away knowing is that she wasn't worthy of being here. That young woman never came to the seminar. I never saw her again. This bridge, and you may have heard this story, this bridge was a gift, a very expensive gift from Japan to Honduras many, many years ago. And it took a lot of money and time and effort, but not too much longer after it was built. I'll show you what it looks like today. That bridge was crossing a river, and rivers move. Rivers are alive, they change, they cut new channels. And so today, that bridge serves no purpose. It is a bridge to nowhere. And unfortunately, today, for many young people, our church has become a bridge to nowhere. We have done a disservice in making church a place to come when you are perfect, when you feel you have arrived, to put on a fake face. And that wasn't the purpose at all, but that's how, unfortunately, they see it. This is what young people today say about the church, and this is not me just telling you this. This actually came from a research study from the Fuller Youth Institute. They say that church is an exclusive club. They feel unable to express their doubts. They are overprotected and sheltered. There is a lack of trust, and there is a focus on their behavior rather than on internal transformation. I want you to think back for a second about when you were between the ages of 16 and 26. I no longer fit that category either. And I can think back to those years and just think for a moment what your anxieties were at that age, through high school, through college, the decisions that you're making. James Dobson calls this the critical decade because of all the change that happens here, developmentally, emotionally, socially, and the decisions that are being made. Unfortunately, the significant influences in their life in today's world are, as you know, social media, movies, music, and maybe books. Maybe. Family is way down the list. And I would add friends to this, of course, too, but that's included in social media. So huge decisions being made, tons of change happening. This is where they're getting their information. Why? Because church is a place where you can't ask tough questions. You're supposed to have it all together. Jake Mulder from the Growing Young Institute, and I'm going to share some of these resources. Again, I'm going to be sharing this PowerPoint with you afterwards. So don't feel like you have to write everything down. But Jake Mulder says our church is calibrated for a world that no longer exists. And that's that bridge to nowhere, right? You can remember things that happened to you at 16, 17, 18 years old. And number one, it's easy to kind of forget about them and say, well, it wasn't that big of a deal. But at the time it was. At the time it felt like a crisis. And to them it is. And we have to remember that and respect that. Secondly, their world is a lot smaller than yours was because everything's at their fingertips and it's instant. So our church has to be willing to grow with this ever-changing river if we want to connect. What can we do? Well, Barna says we must comprehend the context, the cultural context of the young person. What does life look for them? This work, and you're going to hear me say this more than one time. I don't know what position you're in at this point, why you're joining this seminar. Maybe you're a parent, maybe you want to be a mentor, maybe you're a young adult director, you're a youth leader. This is hard work and it is not for the faint of heart. It takes constant, as he says, reinterpretation of events and experiences to perceive life through not our eyes, but their eyes. A youth leader has to retain a balance of biblical values and cultural sensitivity, but with the culture of concern being that of the young person, not the adult. Let's just quickly look at what today's young people, what is this cultural context? Well, half of all mental illness begins by the age of 14, and most cases go undetected and untreated, a lot of times because either the parent says they're just a teenager, they're going to get over it, or the teenager isn't as vulnerable and transparent with it as we'd like them to be. And depression is the third leading, mental illness today. Suicide is the second leading cause of death among 15 to 29-year-olds. Second leading cause, suicide. And we're at an all-time high for girls committing suicide. 40% of high school seniors are using alcohol and drugs, and more than half of our teenagers are saying, where do they go for their problems? The internet, and we're going to come back to that later. Real quick, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but here's a day in America. So 16 take their own lives, 7 go to jail, 80 are raped, 1,000 begin using alcohol, 2,700 kids watch their parents separate or divorce, more than 100,000 bring a gun or other weapon to school. And when I give this presentation, I always have people that are thinking, okay, but that's, the general population. No, I've been doing this work for 5 years, traveling extensively over the US, Canada, Bermuda, and Guam. Our kids are not immune from this. This is the life, this is the where they live. This is the world that they live in. So if it's not happening to them, it's happening to someone they know. And we have to understand that context. And our teenage girls, I am telling you right now, I have yet to go to a high school and spend time over a weekend with them where I don't have at least one girl tell me afterwards for the first time ever that she's been raped or she was abused as a child. Our kids are not immune from trauma. Okay. Very quickly here, the other thing about this is, so that's kind of the world that they're living in. We also need to understand their the developmental stages that they're going through, right? So, and this is really important. This is not just for us. This is something we need to spend time learning to share with them, because the other side of this is teens feel crazy. They feel like they're going crazy because of the highs and the lows, the ups and the downs. And what they need to understand is at this time of life, crazy is normal. There's nothing wrong with them. Now, the caveat to that is we're going to talk about times when it's not normal and when we need to be concerned and when we need help, right? But in general, the ups and downs of adolescence is normal. Their prefrontal cortex is not going to mature until at least they're about 25. And that has everything to do with decision making and judgment and self-control. Okay. Now that's not an excuse to say, hey, your brain isn't fully developed, so you just do whatever. And when you get to 25, it's going to get easier. No, but it's teaching them, hey, spend a little more time. We're going to talk about some ways to cope with this in understanding you're not crazy, you're growing. They are primed to seek and take in new experiences, but that also makes them vulnerable to risk. They are much more likely to take a risk during this time of life. And unfortunately, because of that developmental process, those who begin using drugs and alcohol before they're 18 are over 6 times more likely to develop a substance use disorder, okay, than those that start after 21. Now, facts like this are important for a youth leader to know, because young people, and you'll hear me say this again and again, what I have found with these teenagers is they respond to logic and to the consequences to them. If they understand the direct consequences this can have on their physical, emotional life, they respond to it. And I'll talk more about this, but you're not going to get into an argument with them and win if you're talking about, morality, or you're using, you're pointing to a piece of scripture and saying, this is why you shouldn't do this. Unfortunately, that's not the world that we're living in anymore. Why, again, it's important to understand some of these facts so that we can better equip them. Now, we're specifically talking about young women today, and there's a book that I highly, highly recommend. It will be at the end of my PowerPoint by Dr. Lisa Damour, and she is the go-to person if you want to learn more about, adolescent females. She's it, and she talks about the 7 stages. And these are them. And so I'm going to go through fairly quickly because, again, I'm going to share my PowerPoint. I'm going to share these resources with you, but I think it's important to just touch on these items. And so these are the 7 areas that she talks about. Number 1, of course, they're parting with childhood, right? But they're still minors. And we have to remember that this is a huge transitional period where it's like we're giving them tools, right? We want them to start taking responsibility and start, learning to live on their own, because they're going to very soon. At the same time, you're asking them to do something that in some ways, developmentally, they're not ready to do. For those of you who are parents of teenagers or grandparents of teenagers, she gives this swimming pool analogy. I get a lot of moms that ask me, once in a while, I see my sweet girl. My sweet girl comes back and she wants a hug and she wants to feel, comforted and wants to be with me. And then it's like, as soon as she does that, she shoves off and says something mean or slams the door or whatever. Well, Dr. Damour calls this the swimming pool. The analogy is you as the adult, compassionate caregiver in her life are the concrete. You are the foundation of this pool. But the water in the pool is the world around her. And you want her to jump in that water. You're trying to prepare her to swim on her own. And you see her do it, but every once in a while, as she's swimming around this world, she gets tired and she swims over to the edge and she just has to hold on for a second and breathe and get energy to kick off. And that kickoff sometimes hurts to swim back into that pool. But again, we've got to understand this in order to help them and in order to say, hey, I'm not going to let my feelings get hurt. This is a process. We're in this together. They very much welcome third-party objective advice, which is why what I do has seemed to be very beneficial, because I come in as that third party. I'm objective. I don't know anything about them. And so they tend to take advice from someone like me. So if you're thinking about, if this is something as we talk you're interested in, understand you can have a huge impact on a young adult's life by not being so intimately connected with them, because they're looking for that kind of objective standpoint. Playing dress up, that's we'll get into that too, but try not to look so hard at the appearance aspect of things. Try not to assume too much about that. She's finding her own identity, figuring out who she is as a person away from parents and siblings. And as you see trends and things change, it can be difficult. I know you see things and you want to go, that's interesting, that's new. Roll with it, and you'll see why as we go along. Just roll with it. What they need to hear from us, and this of course is not, I'm not talking to parents, I'm talking to youth leaders here. You do want them to know that their parents aren't the enemy. The caveat to that is, if any of you are interested more in understanding how to look for red flags and signs about abuse, that is something else that I do on the side. I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on that today. But you can certainly talk to me about that. But in general, we don't want to forward and continue this narrative that their parents are the enemy. They're not. Encouragement when they adult well, we usually spend a lot of time talking about the negatives with them, what they're doing that we wish they weren't. When they do something, even if it's a little something, when we call it adulting, big time encouragement and support, concern without judgment. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because we're going to go into this later. She calls the making friends joining a new tribe. So their friends are very much their tribe. This is the family that they are choosing. And it can be a difficult thing for parents and youth leaders alike to say, why them? Why are you choosing to be friends with this person? But we have to be careful about how we approach that. Remember, they are much more likely to take risks during this time. There was an interesting study that looked at this, and I won't go into details, but teens are twice as likely to be risky when their peers are watching them. I don't think that comes as a surprise to any of you. They want to fit in. And again, that's part of the process. They want to belong to a tribe. They want to feel like they belong. Even when they're pushing kind of against, parents, caregivers. They want to tribe, they want to look like somebody, they want to feel like somebody. And the only way to do that is actually by mimicking other people's dress, behavior, these kinds of things. Now, Lisa Damour also talks about things that we need to worry about as we're watching this, okay? And these are probably the most important things that I would share with you from her book. This is when we really need to worry. If she has no tribe, so when we're talking about somebody that is an absolute loner, sits by herself, isn't involved in anything, doesn't have any friends, this is a major concern that needs to be addressed and brought up in a compassionate way. If you think or see that she's a victim of bullying, or if she is a bully, which is something a lot of us don't like to talk about, I do. When I'm traveling and speaking to girls, I talk to them very directly about the fact that they can be mean. Teen girls can be really, really mean. And if you can be truthful with them and target the fact that the reason usually that they're being mean is because something has happened to them, right? Have you ever heard the phrase hurt people hurt people? So people who are healthy and whole and happy don't hurt other people. So we need to draw attention to the fact whether they're being bullied. We'll talk later about how to empower them and encourage them. But if they are bullying, we need to call them out. And we need to say, hey, but compassionately, right? Hey, what's going on with you? Who's hurt you? Because healthy people don't hurt people. Social media dilemma, it's out there. It's not going away. This is their life. They spend hours and hours and hours on it. At its best, it gives them a way to connect. It can be a very, it's their new outlet, right? You know, when you were 16, maybe you spent evenings on a corded phone, you know, catching up and gossiping and all of that. This is the way that they do that. Unfortunately, it also removes a lot of times their ability to have meaningful in-person relationships, and it amplifies anything negative. So the way that I approach this with them is to set boundaries, that the rules for being online are the same as in the real world. If you wouldn't say something to someone's face, you shouldn't be posting it. If you wouldn't send that picture to your grandmother, you shouldn't be posting it. I even have, you know, I try to challenge them, go 2 days without taking a selfie, just 2 days without taking a picture of yourself. And again, these are things that I can share with those of you who are interested, some of the exercises and things that I go through with them. But one of the most important things that you can share with them is once it's online, it's there forever. So this isn't something slipping out of your mouth that you can apologize for and it's gone. It's there forever. And the way that I approach this is, you know, at 33, I have friends who posted things back when we were 17, 18, 19 years old, and it literally prevented them from opportunities in their 20s because the search is real, right? So future employers are looking at that and saying, how has this person behaved? How have they presented themselves? And I have more than one real story of opportunities that were missed because of how they presented themselves online. And that speaks to them. You can see it. It's like, oh, I didn't even think, you know, they're just not thinking about that far out. We want to talk to them about what you're doing now can impact the next 5, 10, 15 years of your life. In terms of social media, if they are, you know, constantly posting and it's like a coping mechanism, that's a call for help. Again, if she's making other people feel small to make herself feel better, if she's consistently somber or crabby. So remember, with adolescence, the kind of natural ebb and flow of up and down is what we're actually looking for. If they're constantly high or constantly low or having long stretches of that, we need to be concerned. And of course, using self-destructive measures to cope with feelings. These are things that they do. I mean, not only on social media, but we're seeing, I'm seeing a lot of girls that are going back to self-harm. You know, they're cutting or burning, things like that. And those are things as youth leaders, again, that sounds scary and this isn't for everyone, but these are things that have to be addressed. And we have to find compassionate ways to say, how are you doing? You can talk to me about anything. And we'll get into that in a second. Again, don't threaten, focus on long-term damage to her. We want to focus on not escaping being caught, right? But on real danger. One of the examples Dr. Moore gives is, you know, she just casually mentions to you that her friend was texting while driving. Well, your impulse, you know, is to get upset or say, that's so stupid, or don't you dare ever do that. And instead, think about the difference between that versus saying, man, do you think you could help her stop doing that? I'd hate for her to, you know, she could hurt or kill herself or someone else. I hope you talk to her about that, right? You're planting a seed, because the threatening, yelling thing, it doesn't work. So you're fighting a losing battle. Also, in terms of fighting a losing battle, the dating game. In terms of dating and relationships and sex, it's happening a whole lot sooner than you think. When I started doing this, there was a little voice in my head. I would go into this room and some of these girls looked so young and so innocent. And this little voice would say to me, Erica, they're not ready to hear about sex and, you know, pornography. You know whose voice that was? That was the devil's voice, because he doesn't want us addressing this. Because let me tell you, by the time I've talked to them about it, they've already read it, looked it up, experimented. You're not protecting anybody by saying, I'm not talking about this yet, they're too young. No, I'm not talking about 10 years old. I don't get into, you know, again, I'm talking to high school aged girls. Anybody younger than that, you know, it should really be coming from parents, but often it doesn't. Again, we want to spend less focus in this aspect with relationships, we want to help her discover what she wants and what she doesn't want in a relationship. Okay. So it's not about pointing fingers and saying he's a bad boy and he's going to break your heart and all these things. Again, losing battle. But what I try to do is I have them make lists, and they're called must haves and can't stands. One of the best marriage, one of the America's longest standing marriage counselor came up with this idea. And it helps these girls get thinking about concrete things that they will not compromise on in a relationship. And I found it to be very, very helpful. In fact, one of these questions, what are your non-negotiables in dating? What are your non-negotiables? Do you know, a lot of times they don't really even know what I mean by non-negotiable. So I tell them, if you have 5 things that you say, these are my 5 must-haves, okay? And I say, okay, so you have your 5 must-haves and you go on a date. And by the end of the date, you know that he's missing one of them. You go on a second date. What do you think they say? Well, yeah, because he got 4 out of 5. And I smile and I say, nope. If these are non-negotiables, if you feel like in your heart, God has said, this is what, these 5 things are what you need. Say, it was so nice to meet you. Take care. And that's the other thing we have to teach our young women, is that it's okay. It is okay to go out one time, and you don't have to keep going, because their hearts get very invested before their minds do. We want to teach them how to use this. If they can start using their mind to think about building these relationships and what they want, then their heart doesn't jump in so quickly because they're thinking already. Make the most of her sharing opportunities. We're gonna talk about that in depth. A couple things we need to worry about. And they will, you often, if you create an atmosphere where they're willing to talk and willing to trust you, if one of the main benefits of dating is a change to her social status, who she gets to hang out with, where she gets to go, you know, this is something we want to be aware of. This is unhealthy behavior. If she's getting her identity, her self-esteem from the guys that she's dating and she falls apart when she's not dating, or if she's dating older guys, that is a place where I do tend to, I address that. And again, you know, some of these things that I'm talking to you about are going to come up in conversation. Most of them are going to come up starting with you. They're not just going to start talking about these things. You know, it's like abuse. I tell churches all the time, if you're not talking about abuse from the pulpit, why would a victim come to you in private? If she doesn't think you're a safe person in public, she's not going to think you're a safe person in private. So you have to be the one to be driving these things in Sabbath school, in Bible study, you know, group, in small group, at a coffee shop. You have to be the one to be talking about these things, because she's not going to bring it up. Obviously, self-esteem is a huge part, especially for our young women today, and how she views herself is so important in terms of her behavior and her choices. And it's developed from love and respect and acceptance, right? Now, we want to assume in our Christian faith community that they're getting those things from home. And very sadly, I can tell you that a lot of times that's not happening. They haven't had that foundation of love and respect and acceptance from caregivers. And so they're being brought, they're showing up in church, probably a lot of times either they have to be, where they're kind of dragged along, you know, somewhere, and they're just looking for someone to take an interest. So when we stand back and see these behaviors and the posting and the appearance and all these things, we assume that's just teenage behavior. They're acting out. You know, we have these kind of very negative assumptions about our teenage girls. And it's time to stop looking at it like that and start saying, what can I do to help? And who has hurt this young woman? And what can I do to help her in this healing process? Well, with self-esteem, one of the things that we want to do is talk about doing what makes her her. And one of those things is figuring out what she loves to do. What does she enjoy doing? Trying new things, asking the question, if you felt better, if you had more confidence, if you just felt like I could do anything, what would you try to do? What would be the first step you would need to try to do that? And when will you take that first step? And how can I help you take that first step? Right? We've got to stop being negative and stop saying, well, why don't you want to do that? And you just, no, approach it from the other angle of what's something you would try if nothing was holding you back, and how can I help you do that? Talking about it's the same thing, talking about sex, drinking and drugs, it's happening, they're using it. 80% had experimented with it by the end of high school. And again, you have two options. You can either crack the whip and create this line in the sand that's not going to, that won't be accepted anyway, or you can create a safe space for dialogue. Again, using substances during adolescence lays groundwork for addiction. You may get into the argument today about marijuana being legal. Legal doesn't mean that it's safe. And again, there is so much research today on cannabis use with adolescents. We never, ever, ever want to make someone feel sorry for asking for help. And I'll say this again and again, put your shocked face away. It is the only way to connect with them is by being, having kind of a neutral face, a compassionate heart, a non-judgmental approach, because the first time she trusts you with that, and you act shocked about it or surprised, or you tell somebody else about it and you don't keep her confidence, that relationship is ruined and it won't happen again. And again, reminder that the choices that she's making can change the trajectory for her future. Same thing with sex. If you think that you're going in there talking to girls and you're only addressing not having premarital sex, you're missing half of your audience. If I go into a room of girls and I'm just only talking about purity, well, then half those girls feel left out because they feel that they've already lost that, okay? They're not virgins anymore, or they've already experimented or fooled around. So if I'm only talking about, continuing to, why should they continue to be a virgin? I've just lost half my audience, right? They think she doesn't understand me and she doesn't care. One of the interesting things I found in addressing sex with young women that tends to be very effective, they feel like when we talk about sex to them, we're wagging our finger and saying, you just don't get it. It's just not right for you. Well, here's the thing. There's risks with sex outside of a, loving, intimate, committed marriage relationship, right? So what I do is say, hey guys, I'm 33 years old and I'm divorced, okay? I went through a very hard time and I'm divorced. So obviously, I'm not a virgin because I was married. Not okay for me to have sex. I've already done it, right? I've been married, been there, done that. I'm 33, I'm single. Is it okay for me to have sex? And we have this open dialogue. If you're 65 and you're widowed, isn't it okay to enjoy the pleasure of a man's company? So we have these open conversations, because then it stops being about them. You don't understand at 16. No, unwanted pregnancies, STDs, misunderstanding of what sex means to another person, talking about unwanted physical contact. These are things that, not the unwanted pregnancy, that may not be a risk at any age, but the others are. And if we have that dialogue, rather than making about, you're just too young, you don't understand, they listen. For instance, if any of you are familiar with the show 16 and Pregnant, when that show came out and showed the reality of being 16 and pregnant, do you know that over the next few years, teen pregnancies dropped by 1/3? That's a big deal. When they see actual consequences and what life could actually look like happening to someone else, they tend to make different choices. It's okay to share opinions. We're not all going to agree, but again, we want to create a safe space. Again, we have to remember that living a life of purity is also not just about choices. Again, I have come into contact with so many of our young women at our schools who have been molested or raped. Okay, so when we talk about a life of purity, that's been taken from them. And that's, again, something we have to be willing to address. I tell the story a lot about the girl who asked me one-on-one, am I a virgin if I was raped? Now, there are a lot of ways to address that, right? I could have been shocked. I could have been, said, well, there's just so many, and it's hard. And again, this is hard work. It takes a lot of heart to do this work. And when somebody comes to you with that kind of question because you created a safe space, it's a privilege. It's a privilege, but we have to be ready for it. And if we don't know these things, if we don't know the world that they're living in, then we're not going to be ready. I'll also tell you this, that sexting is actually happening more often than actual sexual intercourse, okay? So they're sending sexually explicit material to each other more than they're actually engaging in sex at this point. And girls are very much shamed if they don't comply. I was just out of the school who was going through a crisis over this. They're basically, kids are exchanging sexual favors. So if I take you to senior banquet, you have to give me a sexual favor in return. And this is normal. This has become normal behavior because she's going to be made fun of and called names all over school if she doesn't do it. And what I like to tell them here is, once you have shared that picture or video, you have lost all control of what happens to it. And 99.9% of the time, when a young woman shares a picture or a video, he is going to share it with other people. It's fact. So again, we have to encourage, empower, let them know they're not alone in this. And when we talk about it openly, it takes away that stigma. Because here's the thing, another exercise for those of you who are youth leaders that's really great is to ask them to close their eyes when you're asking questions. To have them close their eyes, ask a difficult question. How many of you have been asked to send sexually explicit material? They'll raise their hands. You'll tell them to put their hand, you'll count, you'll see the percentage of the room, ask them to put their hands down, and then you can tell them, guess how many of you raised your hands? When you take away the stigma and you say you're not alone in this, and it's time to fight back and say enough is enough, you're empowering them. And the other thing girls need to know is, talk about long-term consequences. A girl that was 17 sent stuff to a boy who was her boyfriend, but he was 19. The parents found out about it. And long story short, he is now on the registered sex offender list for the next decade of his life. Okay. Now, is he a terrible guy? Probably not. He's probably what we would call a normal young man, but his life has changed. Her life has changed. Again, we've got to talk about the actual consequences to them. Porn epidemic, I won't spend a lot of time on this. For those of you that are again interested, I have a whole seminar on this for teenagers. You're welcome to use it. It is not just a guy problem anymore. We assume, the generation before me, porn was like a man, that was something that men did. That is not the case anymore. Young women are a huge percentage of the viewership, and we have to talk to them very realistically about a couple of things. The damage it's going to do to their eventual sex life, their marriage, the connection with masturbation and addiction factors, the human sex trafficking connection, that gets a lot of them. A lot of these young women did not realize that when they're clicking and they're watching porn, a lot of the women that are in that have been trafficked. They're not there of their own will. That changes their mindset. It's real. It's happening to a young woman that could be them. Those are the kinds of things that we need to be talking about, but it is happening like at a very, very high rate. I know this is a difficult topic for a lot of people, but I will tell you that we cannot afford to ignore this topic any longer. 2/3 of our young women who are struggling with sexual identity are also thinking about killing themselves. They're using drug and alcohol use at a much higher rate. They're not talking to anyone about it. So a group of people that already in adolescence are feeling isolated most of the time, even though they've got friends, all that, they're feeling isolated. This group is extremely, extremely isolated. We cannot afford to treat this like again, it's compassion, not condemnation. It's creating a safe space to talk, to have dialogue. I'm not asking you to give up your biblical values, but we can have conversations about marriage and family and sexual identity. By not talking about it, you could literally be continuing to put this young person's life on the line. And we also need to understand that during adolescence, sexual orientation and experimentation is a lot of the time part of that developmental and physical process of change. So a lot of our girls write into us, I'll talk to you about this in a minute, but a lot of girls write into us and say, I don't know if I'm gay. I don't even know how to find out. Sometimes I have these urges, sometimes I'm attracted, I don't know. And the world would like to tell them to stamp a label on it. Yeah, you are. Be out, be proud, be who you are. Well, wait a second. That actually goes against a lot of mental health counseling approaches, even in the secular field. Let's talk. It doesn't mean you are, it doesn't mean you're not, but let's talk about it and understand that sexual orientation versus sexual behavior are two different things. And we shouldn't be treating this any different than we're treating other sexual choices and behaviors. It's compassion, it's not judgment, it's safe space. So let's talk about the spiritual needs of our young people today. Young people are drawn to adults who are the 3 C's: consistent, committed, compassionate. Consistent, committed, compassionate. They wilt under criticism, but they grow spiritually when they're mentored by loving Christians. And this isn't about dressing like them, talking like them, following them on social media. It's about being present and being genuine. I'm going to share this book with you at the end, but it's called Growing Young. And these are some insights that I got from the book. Number 1, in the midst of a very difficult season of life, what they need from us more than anything else is empathy. Ask, don't assume, expect the journey to look different from yours, and be willing to offer companionship. But I'm going to talk about what that companionship specifically looks like here. In youth ministry, what we call sticky faith, meaning, these are the things that keep them around. Again, this is from the same book, so this isn't from me. Intergenerational relationships. So that's what we're talking about here, right? That's why this is so important. The presence of an adult who cares and is willing to journey alongside of them. The whole gospel. So this is interesting. I'll read this to you from the book. Many young people see faith like a jacket, something they can put on or take off based on the behaviors. We want to seek to help students develop a more robust understanding of the gospel that integrates faith into life. If you're not sure how to do that, don't try. I know that sounds harsh, but if you can't find a way to make the Bible relevant to their everyday life, they're not going to stick around. They don't have time for it. Their life is so full, right? And there's so much coming at them that if you can't make the Bible relevant to their everyday life, they're not going to stick around. Partnership with families. Research demonstrates that parents are the number 1 influencers when it comes to spirituality. So we have to empower them to nurture faith in their families. This is a holistic approach to teen ministry. And lastly, doubt is not toxic to faith. Silence is. I'm going to read that again. Doubt is not toxic to faith. Silence is. Young people want conversation in response to their hardest questions. When leaders and parents silence young people's doubts, young people not only learn that their church and family can't handle doubt, God can't handle it either. God can handle all our doubt. We have to be willing to share that with them, that we have our own struggles, that we have questions, that we have things that we wrestle with. Memorize the phrase. That is a great question. I don't know, but let's look at some things. Let's talk. Let's figure this out. You don't have to have the answer all the time. Thanks for asking that question. I don't know the answer either, but whatever you want to say, let's figure it out together. Preserve the relationship at all costs. Again, if you are somebody who wants to be a mentor, a youth leader, it's a tough job, and you've got to be willing to be there and to journey with them through some pretty tough stuff. You need to know how to connect them with other resources. You need to be able to know how to refer. I tell pastors, all the time with abuse, you don't have to be an expert in abuse, but you should be ready to know how to refer them to the resources that they need. There's no excuse for that. And again, pay attention to your own doubt, to your own struggles. The single most important component of a child's adolescent's healthy development is the consistent presence of an adult caregiving relationship. You can literally be what changes a young person's life. We want to encourage adults who are frustrated with a teenager. You're not alone. You're not crazy. And you need to remember to remind them that they're not alone. Okay. You're joining God in this fight. Again, I've already talked about this. You're not allowed to have a shock face. If you feel that you are incapable of doing that, either take some time to work on it and pray about it until you do, or pass the baton to someone else, because the shock face is a relationship destroyer. If they see immediately by your face and your tone and your body language that you're judging them, that you don't understand them, that you think that they're a bad person, they're going to be gone. And, I've had people say, well, that's tough. I have a reaction and I don't like it and whatever. Well, I'm just telling you from experience, if you care about one or two things, right? You either care about them sticking around or you care about being right. Those are your choices. I care about them sticking around. So be a good listener, be accepting, be yourself, and be genuine. As a mentor, that's what I call it anyway, as a mentor, as somebody who wants to walk alongside our young people. I especially tell mothers this. You have to be willing and able to retrieve her from any situation, no questions asked, at any time. And moms look at me like, huh? So here's what I said. If you created a space where that young person feels that she's at a party and there's something happening and she has this gut, she's got to get out of there, and she doesn't have a number to text or call, what is her other option? Right? If you create a space where your daughter or this young person feels like, and don't get me wrong, this should be a female and a female. When we're not talking about parents, this should be a female mentor with a female young person and a male mentor with a male young person. You can do group things together, absolutely. But here, I'm not talking about a male, adult picking up a young female from a party. Should not be happening. But in that car ride, if she's trusted you enough to pick her up and get her out of that situation, the last thing she needs is a lecture. I'm not saying you don't have a conversation the next day or the following week, but that car ride should be silent. Don't ever give her a reason to regret asking you for help. And they, straight up from the front, should be able to trust you to keep confidences, except for two things. And this is what a counselor would say to them too, right? I will keep all of your trust. I will keep all of your confidences except for two things. I'm worried that you are going to harm yourself or harm someone else. Those are the exceptions to that, because most of us are mandated reporters when it comes to that, or when it comes to if they're a minor and you suspect abuse in the home or by a boyfriend. This is something that has to be followed up on. That's another area that you can't keep confidences. I love this quote, again, by Dr. Damore. The more you bite your tongue, the more she may be willing to share, and the more impact your advice will have when you give it. And no, it's hard, but one of the best things you can do is just listen. Because when we have a lot to say about what they're doing and their behavior, they are already in this shame cycle, most of them, okay? It is really important that we teach our girls that shame and guilt are not the same. Okay, remember that phrase, shame and guilt are not the same. Guilt is about behavior. Shame is about character. We can have guilt about things. Sometimes the Holy Spirit moves us. He convicts us, right, of that guilt so that we make a change in our life. Shame is not the same thing. So using shame to discipline her or try to get a different result is very dangerous. Shame goes after character and it's long lasting. So once she's ashamed, a girl either concludes she is bad or that the person doing the shaming is bad. It's a lose-lose, right? So it doesn't work. Really quickly, an example of that is, I was at another retreat and these girls walked in, and these girls had been coming to this retreat for the teen track for many years. So the woman running the women's event knew them. She'd been watching them grow up. So they had a relationship. These girls walk in and the youth leader, this woman, sees them, and she walks up to the girl that I'll call Emma. And Emma has a tattoo on her forearm that was not there the year before. And the youth leader walks up to her and looks at her arm and looks at her face and puts her hand over the tattoo and pats it and says, "Glad you're here, Emma." Body language, tone. Emma was in tears later that day. By the end of the weekend, I had formed a relationship of trust and respect with her. And she said, "Do you know why I got that tattoo? I tried to kill myself a few months ago. And I got this tattoo. It's a piece of music. It's musical. It's a little piece of music that's on her forearm that brought her out of that time, that brought her out of that darkness. And it's a reminder of what her life is worth." But that youth director in that moment made her feel worthless and like she didn't belong. Yes, don't assume. Showing empathy and compassion doesn't mean you're condoning behavior. But if there's one thing I've learned, it's that I'm not going to convict them to change. The Holy Spirit does that. He does that by working through us, absolutely. But he does it through love and understanding and empathy. Stop fighting about their appearance and start fighting for their hearts. Equip her to live confidently, support her choices and decisions, believe in her and let you know that you believe in her, pay attention, equip her to handle failure. Failure is going to happen, but failing doesn't make her a failure, right? Equipping her to take care of her heart and her physical body and understanding that the way that she takes care of herself physically has so much to do with how her brain works, with how her emotional well-being is, sleeping, getting outside, exercising, trying new things, doing things to relax. These are things we have to be talking to them about and understanding that brain-body connection and equipping her to fight the battle, recognizing that there is a battle raging around her, for her, and understanding how to replace the lies that are being told to her with God's truth. But again, that biblical knowledge has to apply to her everyday life, and that everyday life is hard. We have to understand that context. Compliment and affirm more than her appearance. Affirm her specific traits, her characteristics, her personality, her strengths. Cheer her on, affirm her efforts, and acknowledge her feelings. Don't ask her to be vulnerable and transparent if you aren't willing to be. Share your own story. You cannot even imagine the impact that the sharing of your own story has on a young person. Very quickly, I'm going to wrap up before we go into Q&A here. Gorgeous to God is something that we started back in 2017. And this is our message to our young women. Your mistakes do not define you. Your past doesn't determine your future. Live forgiven, live free. Our confidential Q&A page is our most visited page. I will give you this information at the end, but this is where we offer advice. There's a group of us who answer very difficult questions. So if you're somebody that's saying, hey, I want to do this, but I don't know where to start, go to gorgeoustogod.org, please, because we have answered many, many questions, and the questions and responses are there for you to see. So you can not only see what they're asking about, you can see how we've responded, and it's a great place to start, and you can feel free to use that information. Here's some of the top, and again, these are young Christian women. These are our most frequently asked questions in one form or another. Why does God make people gay if it's a sin? How do I stop watching porn? How do I resist the desire to have sex? Is suicide an unforgivable sin? How do I stop? I want to self-harm when I'm reminded of the pain. Those are our young people. These are the things they're struggling with, and we don't want to be silent about it anymore. I'll end with this. Very simple. When they're loved, when they can trust, when they can express doubt, and when they can ask real questions, they stay. These are some of the books that I mentioned. I highly recommend them. Again, through Elizabeth Poulet, I can make this PowerPoint available for you. If this is something that you're interested in and want to know more about, I highly recommend these books. They've been very helpful to me. And again, you are welcome to email me with any questions or for other seminars that I give to my young people. I don't copyright them. They're not just mine. I'm happy to share them with you if they would be of use. So on that note, Allison, I'll turn it over. If you have questions that came in through the chat, I'm happy to answer those.
Thank you, Erica, for a powerful, powerful presentation. As you were going through it, I was thinking of the young woman that I'm currently in a relationship with. And I would say that I am in a relationship with her and her whole family. I guess, well, mom has called me her Ontario mom, and the kids call me aunt. So
That's a big compliment.
it is. It was a huge, huge compliment. Um, I see a question here that just came on. The individual said, thank you for an excellent presentation and such practical tips. At what point, as the youth leader, do parents need to be notified of the concerns that youth have brought forward?
So if there is an instance, again, it's three things, right? So abuse of any kind, because we're talking about minors. So if she discloses to you that she is, being abused, if she's being raped, or she's being molested, that's when we need to call, I don't know what it's called in Canada, but here would be Child Protective Services. Of course, if it's happening in the family, that you would want to make the Child Protective Services call first. If she's thinking about harming herself, is harming herself, or somebody else, again, you've been upfront. Again, if you're starting this ministry, or even if you've been in it a while, but you want to grow it and you want to get real with your kids, these are the things we need to say up front. Hey guys, this is a new day and we want to create a safe space and a safe place to talk. But these are three areas where in my concern and care for you, we would need to talk to somebody about this, okay? So in terms of parents, you've already acknowledged to that young person, I'm going to have to report this, right? I think we should also be very encouraging for our young people and to the parents of our young people to encourage mental health services. As a church community and faith communities, we do not encourage therapy very often. We think that somehow it's at odds with religion, and it's not. And so we need to, again, be ready with those resources to point them in that direction. We don't have to have all the answers, but we want to say, hey, can I help connect you with a counselor? But with self-harm, it is a time to say to that young person, can we start talking to your parents about this? I want to find a way to get you some help.
Thank you. There's one was asking about the PowerPoint. Now, you mentioned at the beginning that the PowerPoint is available. I'm going to turn this over to Elizabeth, Pastor Elizabeth. If you could, should they give you their emails if they're wanting it, or how is it? I'm not. I'm not the techie person here. I'm sorry.
Yeah, if anyone is looking to have a copy of Erica's presentation, if you just go ahead, I'm going to put my email in the chat. Please send me an email and I'll put her presentation online, and that way everyone can have access to it. I just put in the chat right now, you might have heard of it already. At the office, we have something called the Counseling Initiative, which is financial subsidy for men, women, children, families who are looking for professional therapy, but maybe don't have the health insurance to cover it, or maybe they're students, whatever it is. We have a listing that we've partnered with some professional therapists, and you are only charged 50% of the counseling fee. And then we get billed for the other half. It's totally anonymous. Your name does not come on any of the invoices. And if you still feel that, 50% is still too much, please just let us know. We are more than willing to work with you and your needs to get you the support, or to get your children the support they need. So if you're looking for that listing, let me know. I can definitely send that to you. I don't know if there's any other questions on here. Anyone?
Sorry, I have my hand up because I'm not sure. I came in the middle. I don't know if hand up was an option.
Sure.
But I just think I get so long to type. So permit me. Because we have faith-based community, and because I just feel like I applaud Erica, sorry, for encouraging us to see therapy as something that does not clash with religion, but it's a tool that even us as a religious body can use. So thank you for validating something that I've always thought. As well, I wanted to ask, if a situation like that arises, you're a leader and you are, somebody comes to you, or it's brought to your attention, or a young person comes to you and tells you about the situation. It can be a bit ticklish to go to maybe the authorities or some outside source, outside help before you approach the church. What process would you say? What's the protocol? What would be the proper protocol for us as a church community to say whatever? I know the person's health comes first and the safety and protection comes first, but what would be an acceptable protocol you'd suggest?
When are you specifically talking about abuse of a minor?
Any abuse for a minor, somebody probably who is going for something, who probably is self-harming, couldn't trust somebody in their home to tell, because sometimes you find young people, maybe a cutter or somebody, and concealing it. The parent is not aware of it yet. Parents are not aware of it yet. But they've trusted you somehow. You've earned the trust. They told you. How do you encourage somebody to go about dealing with that? I think sometimes we try to protect, and maybe we're trying to protect the wrong person. We're trying to protect the family maybe, and not the person who is in danger. We're trying to protect the church maybe. So I don't know, I'm just asking what's the proper protocol.
That is so true. And I will tell you, if you think about it this way, always err on the side of protecting the vulnerable. Okay, always err on the side of protecting the vulnerable. And in this case, we're talking about our adolescents, right? So two different things, remember, abuse, and Elizabeth, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but in the States here, if I know that abuse of a minor is taking place, I have to call Child Protective Services. That is number one. And in a church, it's the same thing. If a youth pastor finds out that somebody is being abused, they have to call. You are a mandated reporter and you are protecting that young person and they want to be protected. Okay. Usually with CPS, you can call anonymously. Okay. So if you suspect it, even if they haven't told you, but you suspect it, let them do their job. That's what they've been trained to do. So call, say, this is what I'm seeing. This is what I'm watching. I don't know for sure. You can be anonymous, but let them do their job. So often I see our church members trying to be investigators. That shouldn't be happening. That's not your job. That's not your role. Again, safe space. If it's harm to themselves, if they're self-harming, again, you want to first talk to that young person directly and say, I'm so sorry to. I'd like to, would it be okay if we talk to your parents about this? Now, I can go one of two ways. If it's yes, great. Maybe you can sit down and help them have that conversation with their parents. If it's no, that's why you need to have resources ready, right? Whether we're just starting with us, we've got a lot of resources on self-harm, whether it's having a counselor around that you are aware of, that you can point them in that direction. You have to know where to send them to get the help that they need. But we have to, as a church, stop trying to protect people's reputations. And I think that's what you mean about protecting families, protecting the church. Let's err on protecting the vulnerable among us. And that usually starts with contacting the appropriate authorities.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions that anybody have thought of that they would like to present? I'm not seeing anything here.
Oh, Mrs. Maitland has her hand up.
Oh, okay. Go
Can
ahead.
you hear me?
Yes, miss.
Yes, okay. Erica, thank you for that presentation about the teenage girls and how we approach it and so on. But what about the boys? Have you presented things here that maybe the boys, you have to approach them a little differently from the girls?
Absolutely. I was actually surprised that nobody had asked that, because every time I do this presentation, somebody always says, what about our boys? So very valid question. I feel that it's because of the level of conversation that we have, I feel it's inappropriate for me as a young adult woman to speak to teenage boys about, sex and pornography and different things. So I'm working in collaboration with the NAD Youth Department, because funny enough, all three of the directors in the NAD Youth Department are male. And so we're trying to get something going like Gorgeous to God for our young men. It's incredibly important. I just don't do it myself. I feel it's inappropriate, and I'm not an expert on adolescent boys. I've made this my main ministry, but certainly it's needed. And there are places, now, of course, those books that I shared with you, the first two by Dr. DeMora, specifically about women, or about young women, Growing Young, You Lost Me, books like that are about youth ministry in general. They would be very helpful to somebody that wants to talk to the boys individually. And I'm sure that there are people like Dr. DeMora that speak to the adolescent male developmental process, right? So we need to just be educating ourselves on that. But I'll tell you this, in terms of how we do ministry at the local church level, you're going to get, there are some things that are appropriate for young men and women to do together, to study together, to talk about together. There are some things that are absolutely not, and they're not going to be vulnerable and transparent if they're in the same room, right? I think we all understand that. They're not going to be vulnerable and transparent, especially when it comes to anything sexual, if they're in that same space. So we also have to be working to make opportunities, right, for female youth ministry leaders to take our young women, to make opportunities for them to talk and share alone, and for male youth ministry leaders to do that with our young men. There are times they need to be separate, and there are times that it's appropriate for them to be together. Thank you so much for that.
Perfect, thank you. Appreciate it.
Just to add to that, friends, we have from the men's department for July and August, a focus on men and young men, specifically regarding their mental wellness. We've also done some work with how young men and young women manage pornography and their addiction to pornography. And so those resources are available. Some of them are already on our YouTube channel, and I'll put that in the chat below. But just want to let you know that there is a young women's virtual retreat coming up again this year, August 13 and 14. And we are specifically talking about where we get our value and our worth from. You know, the world will speak quite loudly to our young women, and we want young women to be so ingrained in their heart and their mind that their value comes from God. And so if you've got young women in your life that you know about, that is coming up August 13 and 14. We have been sending out the information to your communications secretaries and your women's ministry leaders. It's been posted on social media. But if you miss it, I'm just going to put the information here. The registration will open probably the second week of July after camp meeting and ministries convention is over. If you're looking for any other specific resources, please send me an email. Let me know. We've got a lot in the office. And again, that therapy listing, please send me an email and I can send it out to you. Thank you. Thank you, Erica. Thank you, Allison. Go ahead.
All right, so let's close this session. It's been a wonderful session, Erica. Thank you. Being so open, answering a lot of questions before we even knew we had the questions. So I really appreciate this session, especially. So let's close thanking our Lord for providing this opportunity for us. Let's bow our heads. Gracious Heavenly Father, thank you. Thank you for your bountiful blessings. Thank you for letting us know that you regard the young women and you regard the older women. You regard each of us as special in your eyes. Thank you for the resources that you have made available to us. Thank you for putting the compassion into the hearts of various individuals, especially Erica, as we deal with the young women in our congregations. May we come from this session. We know that we are better equipped and better prepared to deal with the young women that we have in our circles. As we go from here, guide us as we do the work that you have assigned to us. I ask this in Jesus' name. Amen.